talk a little bit about your own journey and why you came to found Courier 6 years ago. I think it's an important story for our present day understanding of politics.
Sure. And really just grateful to be here and appreciate all of our conversations offline and online as we're navigating this really, really tumultuous and unprecedented period of time. So it's true, Courier just celebrated its 6th birthday last week, which is really exciting. Depends on the day. I feel like it's been a blink or it feels like it's been 20 years. But I really started the journey to starting Courier right after the 2016 election. It just took some time to get it off the ground. We launched in 2019, but I started my career in journalism. In traditional journalism and broadcast. I worked at 60 Minutes, where I learned a lot about sort of the foundations of really strong storytelling and reporting, and then also learned a lot about the negatives of corporate media and really, really, really old school male-driven media newsrooms and cultures. But also worked at Frontline, and I was really inspired when I covered the 2008 election at 60 Minutes to go into politics. I was really swept up by Obama's then candidacy and campaign and his message that there was no red or blue America and the change he wanted to bring. And so I kind of keeping my reporter hat on, I wanted to work in politics and understand what that was about. And I didn't ever really feel that objective, even though it's always been more important to me to hold truth to power and hold powerful individuals and corporations accountable. That's still a common thread in the work. But I went on a crazy unplanned trajectory. I became one of the top digital strategists on the left. I worked on Obama's reelection campaign, helping run the digital video team there. Again, always storytelling and always thinking about how do we communicate factual, but really compelling, emotionally compelling, relevant stories and messaging to the American people to get them more civically engaged and to get them specifically to vote and to vote more in line with their values. I've always been obsessed with propaganda and disinformation and the right-wing media infrastructure. I often joke that the two people that I have learned the most from watching closely from a young age were Roger Ailes and Steve Bannon. I think that they both are brilliant and very, very, very terrifying, evil individuals in a lot of ways. But they really understood that medium is the message. They really understood that media is what shapes our understanding of the world and our understanding of politics. And it can be used for good or bad. And when you have the power of media infrastructure that you control, you can tell people whatever you want. And so obviously we've seen that with right-wing media, and we've seen right-wing media create and lift up individuals like Donald Trump, who really do understand marketing and communication strategy and understand how to connect with a lot of Americans and move them in their direction, sometimes in cult-like ways, like we've seen with the MAGA movement. So I've always been obsessed with the intersection of politics and media and narrative. And as I worked in politics, I became increasingly frustrated and alarmed about how little the Democratic Party and sort of the larger progressive movement really understood the evolving media ecosystem. Obama and the Obama campaigns, including which I was a part of, got a lot of accolades for being sort of the first internet president and campaign and being first movers on certain social media. But frankly, for as long as I've been alive, and I'm 39 years old, the right has always been the real first movers on new communications platforms and technology because they've always invested in building their own media that they own and operate, they dictate, whereas the left had the real benefit of relying on traditional legacy media forever to lift up the truth against lies and hold liars and lies accountable. And that shifted in a really big way as right-wing media became more prominent, because legacy media felt like they were in a defensive posture, being called liberal and needing to prove out that they weren't. So I could you've had this conversation with me before.
No, it's great to hear. Keep going. And so
I wanted to create a media network and a news organization that was unabashed, unapologetic about being values driven, about having a point of view and being transparent about that point of view. I think objectivity in journalism was always an illusion, but I think transparency trumps objectivity. People need to know where you stand and then decide if they want to trust you or engage with your content. And I think now I was, not a humble brag, but I think I and Courier were very ahead of the curve of where the media ecosystem was going. I think most people would agree now in the industry where they were criticizing me and Courier years ago that really trust is built by individuals and by having a point of view. And actually, you can gain trust of audiences who don't agree with you on things if you're just honest and authentic. And so we really infuse those values in Courier. But most importantly, I wanted to start Courier to actually get good factual news and information about politics and government in front of the increasing majority of Americans who are passive news consumers. They are no longer proactively looking for news or information. They're getting it just by scrolling their news feeds, by deciding what Substacks they want to sign up for, what podcasts they want to listen to. They're on message threads and apps. There's no longer centralized news media in this country. It's very decentralized and fractured. And so these are the folks who over-index as lower turnout, casual, or non-voters. They are the ones who ultimately determine the outcome of elections and the fate of our democracy, whether they vote or they don't vote. And I think that's really, really prescient from the 2024 election, because we know that around 19 million people who showed up in 2020 and voted for Joe Biden did not vote in the 2024 election for a multitude of reasons. So we really started Courier, which is a local news network. We have newsrooms in 11 states, and then we have a national outlet that I can talk about too that's exploded, especially among young people. But the local news network is really, really, really focused on meeting these audiences where they are on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. Free email newsletters with skimmable, factual, good, and values-driven news and information. And we now, 6 years later, have over 7.5 million subscribers, and our reach is over 100 million Americans a week across platforms. We're growing very quickly, and I'm very proud of that. But we could be 10 times this big, and I think that's going to be part of the conversation we have, is that there's so little investment in owned media infrastructure in the broader left.
Well, and what 11 states are you in now? For people who are watching who may want to connect with Courier local.
And I can sort of throw the list in the chat. There's a link to that. You can reach them all, but we are in Arizona with Copper Courier. We're in Iowa, starting line, Florida, Michigan, Nevada, New Hampshire, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Virginia, Wisconsin, and Texas.
And the national Courier came later, after you had established the state-based couriers. How is the national interacting now with the states? The national, as you mentioned, has now become muscular and strong and important. How are you managing that back and forth and the balance between the national and the locals?
Yeah, it's a great question. So we launched Courier National. It has all of its own social channels, a slate of national Substacks, including one that I write for the record each week. We've just started to invest very heavily in YouTube, which every media company needs to do if they know anything about where media is and where it's going today. YouTube is the new television. So we've launched a number of national shows and have more. We're actually launching one today, Panic World, in partnership with Ryan Broderick. And we started Courier National in the lead up to the 24 election, sort of to solve a problem we had, because we have newsrooms in 11 states and they each have their own brand and staff on the ground and trusted audience connections. It was hard for us to market to donors and national press about what we were doing in order to help spur growth. So my colleague Kyle and I were sort of brainstorming an idea about launching a national channel and products for an audience more like us, that is more politically engaged, but maybe skews younger and again are not really tuning into, Axios or New York Times or Politico to get good news in front of them. But it is much more political than our state network, and that's intentional. It is about reaching people who do share our left-leaning values, who are really, really horrified and scared and engaged around what this administration and what MAGA is doing to our country, and to give them content and to then be able to lift up all of our great local reporting in a national way. And we really prioritized Instagram and TikTok exploded. The team really understood the algorithm and the way that that platform works. And now we're one of the biggest media brands on TikTok. And I hear all the time from folks who have teenage or college age kids that they know about Courier because that's the news that their kids send them. Every time I speak at a college university journalism class, they all know Courier. And I'm always like, I wish the donor community knew Courier. But it's a generational gap. And so we really are serving this growing under 40 engaged audience that is really, really engaged, frankly, in what's happening politically and with this administration, with news in a way they consume it. Vertical video explainers with our reporters and our correspondents, compelling podcasts, and really skimmable just headlines that get the news across to you, even if it's not our original reporting, because they're not seeing it elsewhere. So I credit the team really understanding and being nimble about how the platforms change with the success of it. And it has also led to just a lot more name recognition for the brand, which we were struggling with for years when it was just the state network.
Yeah, and I was proud to be part of that, early days of the National Courier and the show that we did together last year, Closing Strong, which was perhaps more aspirational than.
We're nothing if not aspirational, Simon. We can't lose hope.
Well, and let's. So I have so many questions. Let me. I'm not going to necessarily do this in any particular order, but let's just circle back to this notion of passive news consumer and your thoughts about, it's also been called by a guy that I'm forgetting his name, wrote a piece in the Atlantic right after the election about ambient information, right? Just about the way that information moves now. And if you can just speak a little bit more about that for people, because what's relevant is based on the analysis that I've done with Tom Bonnier and with others and in collaboration with the DNC, there's a lot of evidence that what happened in 2024 was that these lower political information voters, I don't like, because no one is low information any longer. It's just a question of how they access, what information they get. And so low information is actually kind of the wrong terminology. I use lower political information voters, is that they broke to Trump at the end, that there was, and particularly with young people and Hispanic voters who are both, very large consumers of social media, in terms of their demographically, that there was movement at the end of the election, and the exit polls showed that there was, a significant break at the end, and that's why we ended up losing. And there's a lot of evidence now, and this sort of passive news consumer that you've described is kind of the new it girl, right, in our family. But just reflect about, how the democratic infrastructure, how all of us, not just you, right, but the entire ecosystem of democratic politics needs to adjust and change to a reality of people that are, and I think this is really important, is that they are getting information. It's just they're choosing not to consume information about politics, right? And so, or are disinterested, perhaps is another term, and have other things that they care about more. How do we build a broader ecosystem based on the learning that you've had at Courier?
My short answer to that is to empower more leaders like myself who are of a younger generation and have been online to actually drive communications and media strategy and run these media platforms. And that's not just a biased response, because I actually believe that one of the bigger problems with the larger Democratic Party and infrastructure is that it is incredibly out of touch with the American people. And I think it's a common conversation topic about how they've become really out of touch with where Americans are and their concerns and their issues. And the reason for that is because they are consuming different media. they are in their own bubble. They are in their own echo chamber. We are all in echo chambers. And I will say it is an elite echo chamber. And I hear it from folks in our community all the time that they're just shocked that they know so much, and why don't so many of the American people care about these things? And it's that they're not aware of, or if they are, they're certainly not engaging with news and content about the topics of the day every day. And Trump and the right wing understand this really well. One, they've built their own media infrastructure to define the narrative of what's news and what's going on for a huge population in this country. And two, they understand the attention economy. So they know when there's something that they're doing that is deeply unpopular, which is everything they're doing, they know how to leverage media, both legacy media and new and digital media, to divert audiences' attention to something else. And that's really powerful. And the left doesn't seem to get that. They seem to just assume, in a really ignorant way, in my opinion, that everybody, because everybody has access to the same information they do, which actually isn't true, because a lot of it is behind paywalls, by the way, but that they are less than for not consuming it or not caring about the truth of what's happening. And there needs to be a much deeper reckoning where it isn't just about your distribution of message strategy, which I know that is a hot topic right now. And there's a lot of Democrats focused on, okay, we got to work with creators. I got to do more interviews with creators. Yes, that's well and good. But there also has to sort of be a deeper understanding and connectivity and listening focus with the population in terms of how and what they consume, because they are consuming an enormous amount of information. And one other thing I want to say to the way you framed that question, Simon, is that I actually don't believe that the majority of Americans are not interested in politics or political news. Yeah. They're not seeking it out, but they do care. The political news that exists largely in this country is not made for them. Yeah. It is made for people like us. It is jargon that doesn't make sense. It is about GDPs. It is about job numbers. Like, this was a big failure, I thought, of the Biden campaign and the Biden administration, was this misunderstanding of how to connect people with the information that you want to bring them in a way that's relevant to them. Like, they've lost sight of storytelling. They've lost sight of this ability to listen and then engage with people where they are. And I think the right just fundamentally understands that better. And so I got to the point of being frustrated working in the political system, running smart advertising programs and message testing and all of this stuff, with the fact that, like, it wasn't going to change from within. It's almost too entrenched, this idea and concept of how media works and how we can influence the narrative. It's broken. It doesn't work. And yet we're not seeing really a real shift in the playbook on the left. We're seeing kind of a little things change around the edges. But fundamentally, if we don't own media and we don't build huge trusted audiences among the people who need this good information, and by meeting them where they are, we're never going to win the information war. We're going to continue to stay behind the curve of where the right is. Like, we're always, I feel like, fighting the last war. We're talking about Joe Rogan and podcasts. Yes, those matter. Let's invest in those. But are we also innovating with AI and how that's going to fundamentally change how people consume their information every day and what information is reaching them? So I'm always very solutions oriented. I've built a solution that I think is scalable, but it has been really frustrating and difficult to get people to understand why it's necessary to build and own nimble media in order for them to adopt it, embrace it, advocate for it, buy advertising on it, support it, et cetera.
Well, I mean, one of the things that, okay, you just put so much on the table, so let me try to parse it out a little bit. I mean, part of what you were getting at is, and this is what I was leading to in the very beginning, is that the notion that advertising itself is still going to be central to the way that we communicate is a big open question, right? I mean, I have 3 Gen Z kids. They all have incredible bullshit detectors on manipulation of media. And advertising now, I think, to your point, and this is where we have to develop new kind of terminology for our leaders, the political leaders in the Democratic Party, is that advertising is a smaller and smaller piece of the information flow that happens, right? And as I like the term ambient information, right? I sort of feel like that's almost a more accurate way of describing this. And and I know this from my three Gen Z kids, about sort of what wanders into their world. That some of it is stuff they've chosen, some of it is sent to them from friends, but it's almost never traditional media. And part of the way that I learned about this was my oldest son. I'm in his room, his bedroom. He doesn't live here anymore. When he was 15, started building computers on his own. And I was like, how did you figure that out? What book did you buy? And he's like, Dad, there's this guy named Linus Tech Tips, and he's like an influencer, and I watch Linus every week. And Linus has taught me and given me the confidence to go out and build my own computer. And I've gone back and looked at his videos. And it was amazing to me growing up with having my kids grow up, how much of their world was about trusted people like Linus, right? And people where they view them as teachers, as in community with them, and nothing about advertising, right? There's no advertising as part of this, right? And we are still so dependent upon this kind of theory of buying $1 billion worth of ads in the super PAC, and dropping them at the end without spending a half of that about influencing the ambient part of the information flow through organic created media and actual trusted communicators and all this stuff. I mean, I go back, I'll just say this last point, is that when I did my Spanish language campaign in 2004, the very first Spanish language media campaign ever done in democratic politics, what we struggled with was this exact issue of trust. How could we introduce the Democratic brand to people that had never heard from us in Spanish before? And so what we did is we went and got Bill Richardson and people that they knew, politicians they knew from media, to start the campaign in the very beginning and saying, hi, we're part of this. And by the way, we're Democrats. You may not know that, right? But this is what the Democratic Party and our values mean to me. And we used trusted intermediaries, right, as a way of introducing and kicking off the campaign, because of this very issue about trust and about even the door. How do we get the door open, right? And so I think this work that you're doing is obviously, it's been very successful. Congratulations. But your sense of frustration about the march of the family right forward. I will go down in history of believing that Future Forward was sort of was a failure in the concept of being so advertising dependent and driven as a way of understanding how to influence the debate and discourse. And it is insightful and important for us to realize that, Future Forward, our big $1 billion PAC, dropped most of their ads at the end, and that's when the election broke against us, right? So it didn't work as a matter of strategy. And so we have a lot of learning to do here. And I think I want to just make one other comment, because we haven't talked in a while, and we have our talks, and this is like my version of our talk that we have, is that I do think this concept of listening I've started writing about this, and I actually gave a presentation about this to the state chairs a month ago. I'll send you the deck when we're done here, is that we come at our research not only by starting with issues, right? And people don't necessarily connect to politics, culture, and everything else through issues. I mean, just think about how you evaluate a candidate. Are they strong? Are they good looking? Are they charismatic? Are they persuasive? Are they authentic, to the piece that you wrote the other day? And then what do they stand for? And the thing is, the way that we listen in our research and our polling and our focus groups is we start by throwing issues at them, as opposed to starting from a place of like, how do you really think? We're so issue driven as a history of this thing you're describing, the ecosystem, the blob, whatever we call it. And so we miss things. Trump is obviously engaging with voters on things that have nothing to do with issues, right? And so we do have to learn how to listen far better, to understand how our audience comes at politics, not believe that the thing that drives their understanding is an issue. It may be something deeper. And I think one of the things that we've missed, for example, is this whole strong and weak thing that I write and talk about all the time, that Trump was strong and Our people need to be authentic, to use your term. They need to be strong. They need to be values driven. They need to be warriors and fighters. We don't test any of that kind of stuff in our research, right? That stuff is not even part of any of the polling and focus group stuff that we do. And so I think your admonition about how we need to learn how to listen differently and better is really something I've been coming kind of really convinced is a major opportunity and challenge for us, frankly, in the days to come.
Yeah, and I have a pretty depressing theory on why the Democratic Party is not doing that more. And I say the party broadly, but I think that there is an element of they're really scared of what they'll hear. And I can touch on that more, and we can talk about that more. But I do want to touch on the trust topic, because I think that's the most important one, and it truly is the filter through which we should think about everything about what we need to do, from communications to political strategy to winning elections, et cetera. Advertising has an important role and always will, even as advertising itself, what advertising means changes. We can talk about that too, but advertising does not build trust, right? So the way that I think about advertising's role, and why I think it should still exist and will always exist in politics and campaigns, is because advertising is just it's the last mile, right? It's like where you are injecting very specific information, like a candidate's name and where they stand, like a rapid response opposition piece of research that you need to get in front of people incredibly quickly, and you don't own the media, so you have to pay the advertising. Advertising is really important. Owned media and investment in owned media is not meant to replace campaigns or advertising. Owning media and running media like Courier is about creating the information environment for those campaigns and those advertising programs to succeed. The right understands this. They also spend millions of dollars on political advertising and advertising. They also spend it more year round. What we don't have on our side is the ability to drive a narrative on offense like the right does. And right now we have nothing but opportunity, but I want to talk about a real failure of the Democratic Party and movement around the big betrayal of a bill that passed that is going to fundamentally reorder our government and our country, and absolutely destroy our healthcare system and thus the economy with it. And yet there was no communications to the American people about it. There was a really alarming poll that came out the day before the bill passed in the Senate that showed that more than half of Americans hadn't heard of the bill. And of the ones who had, only 8% had heard about Medicaid cuts as a detail of this bill that is going to impact the entire healthcare system and thus every American in this country in some way, shape, or form. This is the thing that even if there was $1 billion of advertising spent around it, it would have moved the needle a little bit, but it would not have changed what the challenges that we need to solve for right now. We need to be communicating year round. And I think part of the reason that this has been so difficult to reorient our community and donors and elected officials around is because for decades, they have been raising and spending money for zero-sum election gains. They have not been thinking about driving and owning a narrative year-round, because most of the money is organized and the party is organized around candidates or who is in power in the party. It is not meant to be year-round infrastructure that's driving narrative. And so it isn't able to actually earn and build the trust and maintain the trust of a huge segment of the population the way that media and personalities who are talking year-round can. And so, there was so much conversation about what went wrong and why Democrats lost and why we need to invest in new media and new strategies and content creators after the election. And then there was none of that to be able to educate the American people and increase the very, very readily available opposition to that bill to apply pressure. We started to see some pressure work. We didn't have a time ramp because we weren't driving narrative every day. And this is what we do at Courier. And this is so important because there need to be 100 other Couriers right? Like I want us to be 10 times bigger so we can have a bigger megaphone and a bigger impact in our states and in the country. But we also need to reorient our community, and especially our billionaires, of which we have some, into making much more significant big upstart investments in this infrastructure that can drive the narrative year round, that can set the environment for us to win elections at the local and federal level. That's what our missing piece is. And there's so many challenges that people want to move in different directions, but ultimately change is very hard for humans. And so they default to what they know. And that's where, like, Future Forward, I have a lot of issues with Future Forward and their strategy, but they were a product of this system.
Right.
That they really were, because this is how our culture has operated, is put a ton of money into trying to win an election and educate people in the final weeks of that election. That's their strategy. They are still standing by it. That is not a winning strategy when we have lost a significant portion of the population who don't feel represented, heard, or frankly engaged in ways that are relevant to them.
So I want to just think back to something in February of 2023, when NDN, my old organization, was still around. I hosted an event with you, a digital event, a live event with you, Ben Misalis, Joe Trippi from what is now Lincoln Square, and David Rothkopf from DSR Network, Deep State Radio, our good friend. And what we gathered about, and this was after the 2022 election, was this need to build this pro-democracy media. You've grown tremendously. We've seen Midas Touch now become, a major news organization. Lincoln Square is growing incredibly rapidly. We've seen this enormous migration to Substack, which I'd like to believe I played a little bit of part in.
We're first mover for sure.
I was very early in Substack, over 2 years ago, and now it's like I was at the beach and I was by myself, and now the beach is really crowded, right? I can't get an umbrella anymore, and and so we've seen. I think we have to acknowledge, Tara, that from where we were at that event, right, 2 years ago, 2+ years ago, there's been enormous innovation and growth. It isn't enough, and it's insufficient. But frankly, there's more innovation happening and more growth than I would have expected, to be honest with you, from where we were 2 years ago. And so just reflect upon that, what you're seeing in the broader landscape. I mean, you guys have gone, you added, since we started hanging out together, you added the National Courier. That was not part of Courier, right? Midas has, become this supernova, right, of an organization. The Contrarian has become an amazing, important part of our, information ecosystem. And so just reflect upon what you're seeing outside the campaign world and these other, you said there need to be 100 couriers, right? Well, we are starting to see the growth of other places. By the way, the Substack stuff, what's interesting about Substack is that these are all bootstrapped organizations, right? In many cases, some come in with money behind them, right? But the success that we've had in Substack are I have no donors. I have $45 a year subscribers and some people who give me $1,000 a year, but this is completely bootstrapped. There's no investors in Hopium, right? Which is part of the Substack model, right? That you can, make it from, if you produce good content, people can pay for it and help fund you. Just talk a little bit about your general sense of everything else that's happening.
Yeah, I am really excited about the growth of Midas Touch and Crooked, and now this for slightly younger audiences, and the infusion of pro-democracy talent and newsletters out of Substack. I think the gap that still remains that is really alarming to me, and when I say we need 100 more couriers, it's about the audiences we're reaching. All of these things that we just mentioned, and I'll put Courier National in that bucket, not our state network, but national, are talking to people who are alarmed and engaged and looking for more information. And these people are critical to keep informed and engaged, because these are the folks that turn into the donors of campaigns and organizations and the volunteers. And I know I'm talking to a bunch of them right now. You guys are critical. You are the heart of the movement. We need these folks to be having more media to consume, more trusted messengers to go to for strategy and conversation and discourse about what's happening and how to understand the state that our politics are in. But there is not mass media today. So there needs to be media built and for all of the folks that are not already engaged and concerned and looking for content like this and like the Midas Touch videos. And I think there's a halo effect the bigger and bigger these platforms get, these brands get. But what's really missing is media that actually reaches these audiences. And this is where we talk about cultural media and local media that is going to reach the people for free where they are, right? The reason there's been so much rapid growth on the left with the Substacks and the YouTube series and the creators at the national level is because the algorithm really rewards partisanship and polarization, and it puts you in camps. And so you can actually get really big audiences fairly quickly, like we saw at Courier National, and then monetize that. And again, it's reaching the most informed people. How are we going to create investment and community funded infrastructure that is actually reaching all of the other Americans who aren't tuned in, but who are getting passive information that's often driven by the right, frankly, because of the way that they approach media slightly differently. So I think it has to be a both and. We need to have more media that is buy-in for Black communities, buy-in for Latino and Spanish-speaking communities in this country, that is putting the information in front of them, putting that perspective in front of them, because they're not seeing it otherwise. And I think that's a really exciting and urgent project of the larger Democratic and progressive tent, is that we have to build our own ecosystem. We don't have a homogeneous base like the right. We actually have to have an ecosystem of media that meets people beyond those of us in the media we engage. And everybody puts a prior on the type of media they want to consume in terms of their eyeballs and their dollars. And that's been the challenge, I think, has been how do we move more resources into media that isn't for folks like us, but is for the folks that ultimately will end up determining these elections based on the information they have or don't have that's reaching them.
Yeah, two thoughts about that. One is that what you're describing requires a sort of culture of investment that lets go, right? And that doesn't dictate, and that doesn't have something they're looking for to invest in, but sort of invests in entrepreneurs who can build things that they can't even imagine, right? And I think a lot of our funding on our side is a little bit more directed, in the sense that, like, they're looking to, you need to go build this, as opposed to what do you want to build, right? And I went through that with the Democracy Alliance 20 years ago, that I think the Democracy Alliance sort of, unfortunately, in my view, kind of made a decision to have theories of things they wanted to build, as opposed to fund entrepreneurs who wanted to build things that they couldn't imagine, right?
Ding, ding, ding.
Right. And I lost that battle.
And I always have to shout out Reid Hoffman, because Courier would not exist if Reid Hoffman had not invested in me. And he is a founder-driven venture capitalist investor, and it just wouldn't exist if he hadn't taken that risk early on me in Courier. And we don't have enough of those folks willing to take those risks.
Right. And it's also because people who grew up in the Valley and have built things understand that their job isn't to know, their job is to trust somebody that knows stuff more than they do, right? And that's the whole purpose of this, right? And to give them the running room to go create new things that we couldn't even imagine. And that's part of what you've done. And I started NDN 30 years ago. I built a whole thing on my own. Hopium is now my sort of second big, kind of thing that I've been doing. But I think the other thing that I just want to reflect on with you is, and to get your feedback on this, I think the most surprising thing to me about this era of Trump, given everything we've just discussed, right, is that his approval rating has come way down. And, there has been, people are spitting the bit on him, right? And if you looked at my post I did today, I do this weekly check using Economist YouGov polling, which is in some ways some of the best weekly tracking poll in terms of the demographic breakouts, right? There's limits to how granular you can get in each demographic group. But Trump has dropped more than 40 points in job approval with young people, with Hispanics. He's dropped in the 30s with independents. He's underwater now with people that make under 50,000 a year, under 100,000 a year. And so it means that those people got information about him that has changed their mind or caused them to lose trust in him. And in part is that they haven't been up on the air. They haven't been advertising. I think they're about to drop unbelievable amounts of money in advertising because they are not where they want to be. And Trump, my view about Trump in 2026 is that he has just confidence and faith that with all the money he has and the team that he has, that he'll be able to beat us in the head-to-head fight next year. And because he beat us in 2024, he went up against our machine and he beat us. And I think he thinks he can do it again, right? Is sort of his theory of the case. And so why do you think there has been this Trump erosion, given everything that we've been discussing today? It means that information is reaching people that were late deciders for him, that were passive news consumers. And the passive news they're getting now has made them a little bit unhappy about him.
I think it's a really great question, and it's a really great point. And I'm going to try and be concise in my theory on this. So I am a big believer that the algorithms have been designed in a way, though they can be manipulated, of course, and always are, but they have been designed for these platforms like YouTube and Meta, et cetera, in a way that reflects a collective sentiment. The content that drives the most engagement, positive or negative, et cetera. And Trump is doing so many unpopular things that the legacy media is talking about them all of the time too, where typically in election years, right, they're trying to both sides everything. And frankly, like, I can't help but criticize people like Jake Tapper and the reporters that are out now with their new book who still want to talk about Biden and his health and his age now because they're trying to sell books, where it's like, that's very crass. It's also very out of touch where people are. And if you look at the comment threads on those types of videos, It's really wild because people are like, I don't understand why this is in front of me right now. The sentiment, and we saw this before 2022. The majority of Americans do not want what Trump and this administration is doing. Not anything from the ICE raids and the kidnapping of people and the lack of due process, to the tariffs and the impacts those will have on rising costs, to the Medicaid cuts that are deeply unpopular, to what just happened, the horrific extreme weather event in Texas and the aftermath and the connection to that, to the cuts in NOAA and weather alerts and services. Like, all of these things are wildly unpopular and wildly alarming to the majority of people. And so some of the biggest, most influential voices and creators on these platforms, they don't want to be out of step where the majority of engagement is. We have seen Candace Owens, we have seen Theo Vaughn, we have seen Ben Shapiro, we have seen some of the biggest advocates for Trump in his campaign who have large trusted audiences on the right and the soft right all turn against Trump because their audiences are too. And it's hard to see where the circle starts and ends, but you're seeing that because they don't want to be out of step. Joe Rogan has said some of the most powerful things about Trump's ICE and immigration policy lately, right? So when people say, where's Democrats Joe Rogan? It's Joe Rogan. He goes where the sentiment is. And again, this is where I think the left and the Democratic Party is out of touch, because you have to meet people where they are, not where you want them to be. And where people are, right? And people who understand and want to keep engagement with their audiences because they're making a ton of money off of it and they continue to make money off of it, the larger their audience and engagement is, they're going to move where their audience is. If the audience is really alarmed and upset about the ICE raids, they are going to be critical of those ICE raids. This is how media works in this decentralized, fractured, and algorithmic environment. And so it is the idea that you can just insert something when we don't own massive media infrastructure into the narrative that is true and get it to take traction. You can't. You need to latch on to where people are and then bring them along with you by meeting them where they are. And I think that's the strategy that I'm not seeing and certainly didn't see before the bill in terms of educating folks about it.
Well, I think for me, and I talk about this a lot inside of Hopium, I think I'm still stunned at how quickly his approval rating has come down, and with what groups, right, and how it's come down, and it gives me hope, right, that we are going to be able to win this information war between now and next year. because because of their arrogance, because of their extremism, because of their, his delusional state, his craziness, his madness. I think he believes that he can sell anything to the public now, that it doesn't matter what his government does, that he believes that it doesn't, he can do anything. He can plunder and steal from the treasury. He can line his pockets. He thinks that he can sell anything and that he has the power to determine what is true. And it's why one of the things that I've been writing about in the last few weeks is that part of what's keeping his community together, the Congress together, is, this red wave polling stuff that you and I discussed over the last few years. They're doing it more now than they've ever done, except for right before the election. They now are producing an enormous number of polls every month. They're now starting to do some state polls too. This is now moving into the states. One came out today showing Trump up 10 points in job approval, right? The average is minus 10. These things are describing a completely different country than the country that every other poll is basically showing. But what it does is that in their ecosystem, it means that Trump is winning and that Trump is popular and that Trump is young and he's thin and he's handsome and he's all these make-believe things that they want to believe about him. But this fake polling has become the glue, I think, in some ways, of keeping his coalition together, because they say, like, why should we buck him? I mean, everybody loves him. He's doing great. And so, because it's not just one poll, there's now 6 of these pollsters that are regularly producing these unbelievably fake numbers, right, to create this false impression. And the reason I'm raising this is that the gap between their stuff and then all the other stuff that we're seeing that makes it look like he's failing and struggling and the country's rejecting him. I'll give you an example, right? He did the ICE escalation in Los Angeles. That became immediately unpopular. His numbers went down, right? He had his sad parade where nobody showed up that he thought was going to be this thing that was going to revive him. We had millions more on the streets than he did, and we crushed him that day. He then, bombed Iran, and every time there's been a military action in modern times, the country rallied behind the president. The country rejected this effort, and his numbers went down again. And now we have 2 polls this week, right after the big ugly bill passed. I call it the big ugly. And in the Economist YouGov poll, in the Morning Consult poll, his numbers went down again, right? So it's really incredible how I think that this passive news audience that you're describing has basically decided that he's like not okay. That, and it doesn't mean they won't go back to him, but that this isn't really what they expected. And this thing is a little bit uglier than they anticipated, because the country keeps rejecting these efforts that he's had to change the subject, to change the narrative, to make it that he's strong and winning and succeeding again, and not a failure and a loser and a pathetic, big, blubbery baby man, as I like to call him, right? And so I think one of the things I want to have you back on in a few weeks, few months is, this idea that now, this machinery, which is why I think they're going to start spending unbelievable amounts of money, because they know what's going on here, right? They know that they have lost, ground with these groups, right? We've seen it in the leaked polling memos and stuff that come from the people around Trump, the political people that know better. But anyway, I'm going on for a long time, but I still think it gives me hope that we can be successful in confronting him and fighting him and winning over the next 16 months, because something has happened that I think has still got to be shocking to them, that the country he started to lose his grip on the country.
No, that's right. And we did see this, Simon, though, in every election after he won in 2016 too.
Right, 2018,
because the larger narrative across people of all sorts of political backgrounds, et cetera, turned against him when he was in office and doing wildly unpopular things. And that narrative seeps down. The issue is when the dominant narrative and sentiment of the American people hates both sides, and they see a disruptor, and they've forgotten, because we didn't do a good enough job about reminding him how horrible he is. Instead, we were talking about how good Biden was, which wasn't where people were. That's where Democrats fell behind again. And Trump understands this. I also understand this. If everyone stays informed and engaged, we will see record turnout, and if we have free and fair elections. we will see record turnout again against Republicans and against this administration in the midterms. And that's great. But guess what? It won't be because of anything Democrats did. And that's really still the problem that has to be fixed within our side of the street, is that what are we doing to provide an aspirational vision? What are we doing to earn back Americans' trust? Because they didn't all go towards Trump. More of them abandoned the Democratic Party. And there is still so much infighting between establishment Democrats that think they can hold on to the norms and the hierarchy and all of this bullshit that is out of touch with where people are, and not embrace new ideas and new rising leaders and younger leaders, frankly. That is going to be the death of the party as we know it, because it's already wildly unpopular. And so it's a both and, but I just don't want us to win again with free and fair elections historically and not also fix our side of the street. And I think that could be a whole other separate.
Well, let's come back. Let's wrap up. But I want to come back to that, because I think one of the questions I have for you is, how does, and don't answer this because we have to wrap up, but I'll leave you for the next episode when we get back together.
Cliffhanger. Yeah,
cliffhanger is, how does an organization like Courier help foster that, right, and create the dialogue around the aspiration, right? And that's an interesting thing that we should continue to discuss. But listen,
the bigger we get, the more influence we have.
I know, and I think that part of I just generally believe that we are not as far away from where we need to get as it feels right now. But to your point, there needs to be a plan and a path and an understanding, and we need to move and to a better place, and to not accept that the way things are is going to be the way things are going to be, right? And I think that's why you started Courier, is that you felt that things needed to change. You've been really successful, and it's amazing what you and your amazing team. I got to work with you guys last year. I had a lot of fun with everybody. And just thank you for your thought leadership, but beyond that, also that you're just, you're putting points on the board every day. You're getting shit done. You're running a thing, right? I ran a thing for a long time. Running a thing is really hard. And, you are dealing with donors and money and staff and just the craziness of our business, and you're running a thing, and it ain't easy. And I've enjoyed our time together. And Tara, I'm proud of you, and just keep fighting hard. You're doing great. And, thanks for coming and hanging out with us today.
Thank you, Simon. Your friendship means so much to me. And thank you to this amazing community, because you have built something and you are running something, and it's organizing people who care deeply about this country. And it's such an important part of the puzzle. So thank you.
And the word that you used today that I had somebody else write to me about this today, is this whole concept of trust is something that I have to think about more. I think it's part of the reason Hopium is successful, is that there's honesty, authenticity, integrity to the work that we do. But it's also, I need to think about it more.
And consistency. You got to keep showing up for people.
Yeah.
You got to keep showing up for people. You can't disappear when the election's over.
No, we actually grew a lot after the election. We've grown less in the last few months, but after the election, Hopium grew.
Courier's fastest growth in 6 years was the 3 months after the election.
Yeah, we grew a lot right after the election, and we've grown less recently. But this issue of trust, when you come back next time, let's spend time talking about that. Tara, see ya. Thanks for coming.
Simon. It was a pleasure.
Okay. See you, everybody. Thank you so much.